This episode is sponsored by Smart Travel, a new podcast from NerdWallet. You know that one friend who always finds the best travel deals, picks the right cards, and somehow ends up in first class for the price of coach? How do they do that? Well, Smart Travel is like that friend, but in podcast form. They cover all things travel finance, like which travel cards earn their keep and which are just heavy, shiny metal, and planning group trips that won't ruin your budget or your friendships. So travel smarter and spend less. That's the key with help from NerdWallet. Follow Smart Travel wherever you get your podcasts. Armchair-Explorer is a part of the Voyescape podcast network. Check out all of their shows from around the world at voyescape.com.
It's a very rich archaeological area, and archaeological work here is relatively new. We have geographic area about the size of Belgium that has had no real archaeology done on it. So there is archaeology littered throughout this landscape. And because historically this is quite a remote place and for some years relatively hard to get to, so we haven't suffered from zealous archaeology of the 19th century that happened in places like Jordan or Egypt.
Hey guys, welcome to Armchair Explorer. I'm Aaron Miller. I'm a travel writer and your host. And today we've got one of our connection episodes. You may have noticed we do lots of different formats, from on-location documentaries and destination guides to bucket list episodes and lots more. It's kind of like a travel magazine, has lots of different types of articles. And our connection episodes like today are basically deep dive interviews with people that we think are doing awesome things. Oftentimes, these are people that we met whilst we were recording an episode in the field, but we didn't have enough space in the finished documentary to fit it all in, but we think it's great, so we decided to create a special episode all about them and their work. So today, we're going to Alula. Located in the northwestern corner of Saudi Arabia, Alula is an oasis in the desert. It's got 200,000 years of human history, and it contains some of the most incredible archaeological wonders in the world. But up until recently, almost no one outside the country had really got to experience them or see them. Saudi Arabia just wasn't open to visitors, but now it is. And we were one of the first people, my producer Jason and I, to actually go there and have a look. Now, just really quickly before we get going, I know this part of the world is filled with lots of preconceptions. The whole of the Middle East is, but possibly the most in Saudi Arabia. But I ask you, as you listen to this episode, just to put those preconceptions to one side. If you're familiar with the show, time and again, I hear from guests how their personal experiences in the Middle East are not at all what you might think they would be. It's a region renowned for its hospitality, the generosity of its people. It's a place rich in history, art, and culture. It's not perfect by any means. I'm not going to make any judgments. This isn't a political show, but I will say that we are explorers, and that means more than anything else, keeping an open mind. And by the way, on this trip, our mind was absolutely blown. There are not many places left where you can be a true travel pioneer, among the first to open the door, and Alula is one of them. So if you haven't checked out our 3-part series, The Elements of Alula, which we recorded on location, I would highly recommend doing so first. You don't have to, but I think it's going to enrich your experience of what's to come, especially the episode called The Element of Earth, where we visit some of the places our guest is talking about. Just scroll back in the feed. The show is called The Elements of Alula. It's a 3-part series. We're really proud of it. I think you're going to like that too. So with that, I'm going to welcome Jonathan Wilson. He's the Arts and Culture Administration Senior Manager at the Royal Commission of Alula to the show. And we're going to start with a little tour of the Royal Commission's collection. And just to set the scene, we just got back from the desert where we had an absolute blast, but it was hot. So we stepped inside Jonathan's office where archaeologists are working day and night to document the treasures of this lost kingdom of Alula.
So, wow.
This is the treasure room.
This is one of our rooms called main storage, which is historically where all the archaeological material was kept.
So what's the most exciting find recently?
The most exciting find recently was one of the teams found these very large hand axes, so sort of the length of your whole lower arm, which is highly unusual because hand axes normally by definition they fit in your hand because you've got to do it. So what the purpose of these really very long ones were, we don't know. They were just found 2 weeks ago, so they're just starting to do the work on them, and they've got, I believe, 12 different examples that they've found. So it's quite a large representative sample. The other things with these early hand axes is you use a hand axe till it breaks, so it wears down. We have some in our other storage room. You'll see sometimes they have a very sharp edge, sometimes they're worn down with use.
Yeah.
These ones still have quite a defined edge, so they're unusual for being large and still being relatively unused. So there's quite a lot of work for the archaeologists to do to work it out.
Do you have a guess of how old they might be?
Like 10,000 years old going backwards. Stone tools are very hard to give a precise dating to, so we give them these very broad ranges. But the way people were living 50,000 years ago as opposed to 40,000 years ago, there's not a radical difference there. There's certain moments where things change very quickly, and there's moments where things go on in a very long continuity.
It's fascinating, isn't it? People lived fairly similarly for 100,000, 200,000 years, and then all of a sudden the rapid change through the millennia.
Well, we can look at one of the things that we have here, which is one of the key moments of change here and everywhere here, which was the domestication of cattle. The point at which you no longer have to go out and hunt, so you then stop having to make stone arrowheads to hunt for animals, and your life is revolved around following herds around to get them to. You can be in a settled place and the animals are with you, and you can just go out and kill them. So this was a 7,000-year-old cattle head.
Oh my gosh.
That luckily Francesca's working on at the moment, so it's out.
It's amazing it's still together. 7,000 years.
So 7,000 years old. This one was found, we believe, some sort of altar. So the centre section had 2 carbon areas, so where charcoal was born, so we can carbon date it. And then in the rear chamber, we found a selection of animal horns, gazelle, ibex, and this, which is early cattle. So this is much bigger than your standard cow today. They were unusual because it's just the craniums, the tops of the head, and the horns. No jawbones, no lower parts. So we take from that these must have been ceremonially laid, because if you have a whole cow, you don't end up with just the top of the head. And in the chamber next to it was buried human remains. So these are Nabatean funeral textiles that the bodies were wrapped in tombs. There's no embalming, there's no removal of organs. One of the bodies was found with a date necklace around it, but then they have this very rough covering that goes around the body and wraps it, tied together with these kind of hemp straps. And if you look at the straps, these are 2,500 years old, but they look brand new.
That's incredible. I never would have guessed that's 2,500 years old.
And these fragments here is those leather bags were then tied together with leather straps, and then the leather straps were used to carry and place the body in the tomb.
Body bags, almost, yeah.
But the nicest piece we've been working on at the moment is this tiny little piece here of fragment, which we think was one of these outer coverings. This is actually wild silk.
Wow.
Wild silk's obviously not native to here. So this has travelled quite a long time in the Nabatean period to get here. There's an archaeological team at the moment in Paris currently undertaking research on these 2 dyes to see whether they can identify what was the vegetable that was used for the dye, because was it dyed somewhere else and brought here, which we think is probably likely, or was it done here? But if they can identify where those dyes are, we can tell more about where did this silk travel from to get here. And then it was used as a body wrap and then preserved in the tomb, and it's still here 2,500 years later.
Amazing. We followed Jonathan to a quiet corner in collections surrounded by massive shelves on wheels. We did our best to hide from the preservation work being done on artifacts, but you are going to hear some drills and picks at times. Jonathan's going to start by relaying about 200,000 years of continuous human history in just over 2 minutes before exploring Alula's reputation as a peaceful destination since literal antiquity. It's really fascinating. He's going to unearth the life-giving water sources and trading routes that allowed it all to happen. And finally, we're going to switch to Hegra, a World Heritage Site that's archaeologically invaluable for the layers of cities built onto other cities, which preserve a record of past civilizations, both well-known like the Romans and new like the Nabateans. It's a fascinating conversation. We go really deep into one of the most amazing places I think Jason and I have ever visited.
Alula itself is an oasis. In the desert, water is the most important thing that's going to sustain your life. So here we have evidence of human habitation going back about 200,000 years. Then we really begin to see a step change from the evidence that we have from about 7,000 years ago, where we have the domestication of cattle and people beginning to go from a more nomadic lifestyle to actually settling in places where they can farm. That then leads on to the development of slightly larger groupings, and then we begin to move into what we call the kind of ancient kingdom era, the kingdoms of Dedan and Lahan. They go from the 5th century before Christ up into the 1st century BC. At that point, the Nabateans, who are north of Hers in Petra, move into Hegra. And so the Dedan disappears from the scene and we become a Nabatean kingdom for the next 200 years. 106 AD, the Romans arrive. The Romans defeat or take over the Nabatean Empire, and then Hegra and this area becomes the southern outpost of the Roman Empire. So the Romans are here then for about another 200 years. Rome isn't conquered, it just goes into decline. As we're the furthest outpost, they just roll back. So their settlement at Hegra continues, but it's no longer Roman. So people continue to live there. From the time of the Romans, we then don't really consider it kingdoms until we come into the Islamic period, and then we take it from, in the Gregorian calendar, about 693, or for the Hijri calendar, 0. And so we then have the Islamic period. People are continuing to live in Hegra, but we have a large settlement at a place called Kor, Mabiyat, which becomes a very important town for about 500 years. We think as a result of climate change, changes in water, that dies out, and you get the growth of the settlement around the oasis and around Alula. And that old town of Alula, archaeological investigations are going on to work out, okay, what's the oldest part of it? How did that develop? But that continues in occupation right up until the 1980s.
It's remarkable that people moved out of there just in the 1980s. Is this, if you think about 200,000 years ago until today, this must be one of the oldest continuously inhabited places there is.
It's certainly wonderful to see that habitation for such a continued period of time. That early settlement shows the movement of people from Africa over the land bridge through Egypt to this area, and pretty much stayed here ever since.
Your job is, of course, dealing with the past, but one of the things that I found fascinating about Alula is that story is continuing, like that the old town literally buttresses up against the new town. Is that something that you find interesting too?
It is. I mean, people here have a great knowledge and understanding of their history. They celebrate it. There's been a great reuse of a lot of history throughout the site. So you see Dadanite things going into the Nabateans, people taking those into their modern day houses today in their constructions. But we do a lot of work with the community in terms of trying to understand their heritage today and what's important to them. We go in and we look at their photographic collections, their manuscripts, and try and understand, okay, what is Alula today and what is it that they would want people to know 1,000, 2,000 years in the future as to how they live their lives today.
That's fascinating. One of the things we've heard as well is that Alula has always been a kind of peaceful place. Is that accurate? I just want to kind of make sure that's historically accurate. It seems incredibly unusual.
When we talk about like the transitions between these kingdoms, We certainly know that there was kind of a battle in the 3rd century BC between the Babylonians and the Lahanite people when the Babylonians defeated the Lahanites. But most of those other transitions between kingdoms weren't necessarily ones of conquest or of armed conquest. And so in a lot of the inscriptions, we don't really have recordings of battles. This is a trade route town. A lot of those kingdoms established because they were looking at trade, not necessarily military expansion. Obviously, the Romans coming in, they're quite a military thing, but this was just their border. They didn't look to go on and conquer anything else from here. So the only 2 real conflicts that we have are the one with the Lahanite and Babylonians, and also in World War I, there was the great Lawrence of Arabia, Hijaz Railway activity going on here.
So I didn't know that history was connected. Could you talk about that Lawrence Arabia piece?
So the Hijaz Railway was built and ran through Alula from Damascus down to Medina. And in World War I, the Ottomans and the British were enemies of each other, and the Arabs were the occupied people here. So the British sided with the Arabs to help try and rise up against the Ottomans. And part of that was going along and blowing up and disrupting the Hijaz Railway, which was bringing the Ottoman troops up and down. This most famously is recorded by Lawrence of Arabia, who mostly operated in Jordan, but was down in Saudi Arabia as well, working with the local Arab and Bedou tribes to basically disrupt the Ottoman forces in World War I.
You've spoken a bit about the fact that, of course, Alula's an oasis, a desert oasis, and that's how and why it became a town and, a settlement going back further than that. Could you talk a little bit about the incense road and the trading route, and what is the incense road for people that aren't aware of that?
So the kingdoms here existed because of trade. We're a land route that goes north to south. West of here, about 200 kilometres, is the Red Sea. So there's a sea route, but we're on the land route. When camels become domesticated, you're then able to transport goods over long distances. People don't ride camels, they're used for carrying goods. But you have to limit it to goods that are light. In China, you would go for herbs and spices because they're light. Here, south of us is what is modern-day Yemen and Oman. Down there is where frankincense comes from, tree sap. That's highly sought after in the Levant, which is north of us, what is now today Lebanon and Syria, and is used in primarily religious practice, the burning of frankincense. Most people in the West are used to hearing it at Christmas as one of the gifts that comes. And so that's being able to be transported on camels because it's very light. It's very valuable. So these kingdoms exist along the trade route by basically they take a little bit of money from the caravans that are coming by to guarantee their protection through their area of land. And so the more land you control, the greater your ability is to take money off those caravans. So that's this ancient route that's going through. Dedan, where the lion tombs are, they're actually reminiscent of Mayan carvings from the south of Yemen. And there's a little outcrop that most people probably don't notice, which we've now been able to establish was a Mayan settlement that we think was just south of Dedan. So the Mayan traders would come up, find this little settlement before they went into the town of Dedan, before they moved north. So that was the incense route. In more recent years, that route has turned into the pilgrimage route. So it's the Hajj pilgrimage route. So if you were taking the Hajj down from Damascus, you would follow that exact same road, the exact same path through Alula and down to Medina and Mecca.
So it's still alive today. Yeah. The Mayans, that kind of blows my mind. I had no idea the Mayans were connected to this area.
Yeah, so to the south of here, you've got the Mayans and the Sabians, you've got the ancient kingdoms of Yemen. They're coming up and trading with here. The Arabian Peninsula is created from all these ancient kingdoms. So some people are used to, the Sabians, that's the Queen of Sheba, which is kind of brings up in people's minds this kind of very opulent people. They're getting their money through the frankincense trade. Before oil, that was the wealth of the Arab Peninsula. And so that's all coming up on the trade routes. the Nabateans controlling the trade in Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria as it is today is what makes them a great empire. Goes back to your point of it's very peaceful because they want to control trade. They're not interested in having battles. And that means good relationships with your neighbours, and that means guaranteeing security for those caravans.
When I was in Dedan yesterday and we were walking around, there were a couple of archaeological digs happening, and there seemed to just be things that you could literally almost pick up and find right there. Could you speak a little bit? I think people might assume that when you hear of an archaeological site that it's done, but this is like very much, I feel like you're going to be digging here for the next 3,000 years.
Yeah, it's a very rich archaeological area, and archaeological work here is relatively new. Our two oldest archaeological missions, which is Hegra and Dedan, are both coming into their 20th year, which in the scale of those sites is a very short space of time. But we have geographic area about the size of Belgium that has had no real archaeology done on it. So there is archaeology littered throughout this landscape. And because historically this is quite a remote place, and for some years relatively hard to get to, it's much easier to get here today. So we haven't suffered from some of the kind of zealous archaeology of the 19th century that happened in places like Jordan or Egypt. So we've now got more scientific-based archaeology going on, trying to actually better understand these sites, and also trying to have a less of an impact on them, and also trying to get those stories out to people of who are these people and how did they connect to the rest of the world. To me, this place, I live here, I've lived here for 5 years. It is a living museum landscape. I talked to one of my local friends that he remembers going to school underneath the cliffs of Dedan. So in his classes, he's looking out on what he knows to be a Dadanite landscape. You can't escape it as you walk around these places, and even walking through Old Town, you get a sense of this is a place that people have lived in for hundreds of years. Yeah,
it feels different, doesn't it, in a way, when you have that kind of deep history embedded into the earth. And kind of speaking of that, we were just visiting the inscriptions in Jebel Ikma, and can you speak a little bit about that inscriptions? I found that a really remarkable place. I've been lucky to see petroglyphs in quite a few different places in the world, but I've never seen anything like that.
So Jebel Ikma is a very sacred site. So from Dedan, the kind of temple site, the main town, it's roughly a day's walk to go to Jebel Ikma and back. Everywhere in the desert's very quiet anyway, but you go in there and it's very, very peaceful. It's in shadow, so even in the height of summer, it's cooling. So you can look back and think, okay, in days before air conditioning, these are the places that you can go and sit and contemplate. And the inscriptions there all talk of giving thanks to God for some blessing on the people or some blessing that something's happened. A lot of them are in word format, but there's also pictures and visualizations of things that bless them. Musical instruments or the large cows that you saw. All these things are kind of reminiscent of things that would have given joy to people at the time or would have been particularly significant at the time. It is the largest concentration of inscriptions, and the inscriptions are kind of picked out in relief. So they're taking out the stone and leaving the letter wreath. That takes a long time to do with a piece of stone. So, they're spending a lot of time there creating these inscriptions. So they must have a concept of this is going to be here for a long time because it's taking me a long time to do it. And of course, you come as the next generation and you're going to see what the last generation's inscriptions were. They're still there. So you're going to add your story next to their story.
So let's talk about Hegra. It was amazing to see, and it's kind of the crown jewel in many ways here, I suppose. What is the significance of it? It's kind of just opened up to the world, but I feel like it's, the next Petra, or it's at least equivalent in some ways.
So Hegra was Saudi Arabia's first World Heritage Site. It was given UNESCO World Heritage status 15 years ago. But what makes it World Heritage is the layering of history from the prehistory days, the Dadanites who were living there before the Nabateans, the Romans come, the Islamic period, the Hijaz Railway, right up until 1982 when the families were moved out of there. And so you get these very important kingdoms being there, but you also get this continuity of human occupation. But the most visual representation is the Nabatean tombs and the Nabatean period that was there. And it is a very different experience to Petra. Petra was the capital city and had much longer occupation. But Hegra has this large plain in the middle, which is the residential area, and then all the tombs looking around it into the town. So whereas Petra, you walk through the souk and everything's in this nice linear area, Hegra is this almost bowl effect of looking up at the tombs going up around them as a reminder of their mortality.
And Petra is spectacular and popular for that, but here you can still find those quiet moments.
Yes, Petra is incredibly popular, but it's also very condensed because of the souk and having to walk through this valley. Hegra is much more of a plain, so you get many more of these kind of silent moments, and occasionally it's called the silent city because you can be almost on your own in that landscape. But you can still get the beautiful kind of Nabatean carved tombs, but you can also get a lot of solitude there as well.
Yeah. Could you talk a little bit about how the Nabateans, or why the Nabateans were so renowned for their control of water and why that was so important?
So yes, the Nabateans were very renowned for their use and control of water. In a desert environment, water is what's going to ensure your longevity. So they were very good at both controlling water, that's in terms of being able to move it from one place to another and to be able to store it. In Hegra, there's a place called the Bedouins, which is the meeting place, which is the first place you would arrive on the camel ride down from Petra. And there's places for ceremonial washing, for giving honour, but behind that, they've hollowed out part of the mountain as a reservoir, and along the entire mountain, they've cut out these water channels to basically collect and gather all the water into this internal reservoir inside the mountain. And this is all done 2,500 years ago using hand tools. Water is very precious here, particularly in the summer months. If you don't have water, you're not going to last very long. Hegra has 130 wells. There's many inscriptions in the landscape about water, and warning people if they don't have enough water, they're not going to make it to the next well. Whenever you travel around here, even in the summer now, when I walk around the town in the summer, people will stop and give me bottles of water. People will come up and make sure that you are looked after here.
We felt that. Thanks for so much.
That's okay.
It took longer than we thought it would.
That's okay. Thanks a lot.
So that's it for this episode, but if you haven't done so already, scroll back in the feed for our other 3 on-location documentaries about Alula. It's called The Elements of Alula, Earth, Air and Water. And here's a little taste of what you're going to find.
Woo! Jason's a camel whisperer.
This is a humanity history. This is a history that we are sharing, and this connects the world with each other.
Saying about calm meditation? Yeah.
I love you.
This is the pure, unfiltered feeling of being in the desert.
We don't even have to close our eyes because we're already in the back of time here in Taima.
Right, yeah.
It's a really important thing to have our identity through our car.
I bet this is the best place for hide and seek in the world.
Yes, it is, yes. you should be sure about that.
Welcome to the guests of the palace. The prince will be delighted to see you.
Armchair Explorer is produced by Armchair Productions, the audio experts for the travel industry. Jason Patton did the field recording for this episode and production. I'm Aaron Miller. I wrote and presented the show, and Charles Tyree does all the extra production on Armchair Explorer. I'll see you next time.
Quick question. Do you want travel tips from people who have actually been there?
Our show is co-hosted by Tim Johnson, an award-winning travel journalist who's been to more than 145 countries around the world. And I'm David Brody, the other co-host who's been travel podcasting for 20 years while traveling to 50-plus countries around the world.
In about 10 or 20 minutes per show, we break down a destination with the kind of insight you usually only get from long guidebooks or hours of research.
So if you want expert advice, zero fluff, and travel inspiration that you can actually use, search for Travel in 10 wherever you listen to podcasts, or you can also find us at voyescape.com.
Hi, I'm Pauline Fromer, host of the Fromer's Travel Podcast. We post new episodes weekly, detailing the kinds of money-saving tips and cultural insights that will make your trips richer without making you significantly poorer. We do so by interviewing real travel experts like TV host Samantha Brown, Fromer's authors from around the globe, and such public figures as Free Solo's Alex Honnold. It's a fun travel party. I hope you can join us.